Evelyn Westlake had spent years dreaming of a quiet life by the water, away from the endless noise of the city. When she discovered the old lakeside estate listed for sale, something about the weathered boathouse and the way the sunrise shimmered across the lake instantly drew her in. The realtor mentioned it had been vacant for a decade, once owned by an old couple who built much of the original dock network decades ago. Evelyn barely hesitated. She signed the papers, packed her boxes, and moved into her new home by Lake Mirror Pond. The air was crisp that first morning, the kind that carried the scent of pine and promise. She walked along the creaking boardwalk, feeling at peace for the first time in years. Her tranquility didn't last long. The very next afternoon, she noticed a convoy of shiny black SUVs pulling into her driveway. Out stepped a group of well-dressed strangers, their expressions sharp and businesslike. Leading them was a tall man with a clipboard who introduced himself as Mr. Harrow, representing the Emerald Grove Homeowners Association. Evelyn blinked, a little confused, since she hadn't realized her property even fell under an HOA's jurisdiction. Harrow's tone was polite but clipped as he said they needed to discuss the docks. He explained that the HOA managed the docks surrounding the lake and that her recent purchase might have complicated existing arrangements. Evelyn felt a ripple of unease as he handed her a stack of legal documents filled with dense wording about shoreline access and association property. Trying to stay calm, she invited them to speak further, but Harrow declined, saying the board would follow up formally. Once they left, Evelyn stood alone in her yard, staring at the water. The thought that someone could show up unannounced and start dictating what she could or couldn't do on her own land unsettled her deeply. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, she wandered back to her porch and opened her deed reading line. Cup of coffee and sat at her kitchen table, staring at the HOA documents Mr. Harrow had left behind. Every line seemed intentionally complicated, full of references to property boundaries, water rights, and bylaws written in legal jargon. Determined to understand what she'd gotten herself into, she decided to visit the county registry office in town. The clerk on duty, a friendly man named Marcus, recognized the lake property immediately. "Oh, that old boathouse lot," he said, smiling as he flipped through old property files. "Not many people know it's technically independent from the Emerald Grove development." His words caught Evelyn's attention. Marcus pulled out a thick binder and showed her a yellowed survey map from the early 1980s. The lake had been partially dredged back then, and the surrounding land divided into HOA lots except for one parcel that remained private. "That's yours," Marcus said, tapping the paper. "This section of shoreline and the docks built off it fall entirely under your deed." He pointed to a faded clause in the title transfer: "Exclusive literal rights are hereby conveyed to the property owner of parcel 14A. Evelyn's heart quickened. That meant she didn't just own the land, she legally controlled the water access and docks beside her shoreline. Feeling both relieved and indignant, she drove back home and followed the path down to the lake. But when she reached her dock, her relief turned to disbelief. A freshly installed sign now stood beside the boathouse: "Private dock, Emerald Grove HOA members only." It hadn't been there yesterday. Her hands clenched around her phone as she took photos for evidence. Within an hour, 2 HOA board members arrived, a middle-aged woman named Ms. Caldwell and a tall man with gray hair named Mr. Peters. They smiled tightly, pretending their actions were just a precaution. Evelyn calmly explained what she'd discovered at the registry, that the docks by her land were legally hers. The pair excha. The wind picked up that night, rattling the windows and sending thin ripples across the dark surface of Lake Mirror Pond. Evelyn had finally begun to relax after a long day, curled up on the couch with a book and a cup of tea, when she heard something faint through the glass: the low hum of an engine, muffled splashes, and hushed voices drifting from the shoreline. Her pulse quickened. She turned off the lamp and peered outside. Through the silver haze of moonlight, she could make out the dim outline of a small pontoon boat approaching her dock. 2 figures, dressed in dark jackets, were moving quickly, tying off a rope to the cleat she had repaired only the day before. Evelyn slipped on her robe, grabbed her flashlight, and made her way down the path toward the boathouse. The damp air smelled of lake water and pine. She flicked the beam on, illuminating the intruders mid-motion. "You're trespassing," she called out, her voice steady but sharp. The pair froze, startled. One of them, a younger man she recognized from the HOA meeting, stammered, we thought this was still community property. The other tugged nervously at the rope, muttering something about just docking for a minute. Evelyn pointed to the wooden post where her new private property sign gleamed under the light. "You know exactly what this says," she replied coldly. After a few awkward apologies, they untied the boat and drifted away into the mist, leaving behind only the soft churn of water. When Evelyn returned to the boathouse in the morning, she noticed fresh boot prints on the wet sand and one of her boundary stakes knocked out of the ground. That was enough for her. She drove straight to the sheriff's office to file a report. The deputy listened patiently, jotting notes, and promised to swing by the area more often. Evelyn also emailed the HOA board, detailing the incident and attaching photographs of the damaged stake. By evening, her inbox was flooded with responses, some defensive, OT. The following week brought tension that even the peaceful lake couldn't wash away. Evelyn's quiet mornings were interrupted by HOA trucks parking near her property, workers inspecting shoreline markers, and neighbors whispering whenever she walked by. Then one afternoon, a bright flyer appeared on her mailbox: emergency HOA meeting, discussion of dock rights and community access. Attendance mandatory. The bold red letters made it clear that this wasn't just another neighborhood dispute. Evelyn was being put on trial in the court of local opinion. When the night of the meeting arrived, she dressed simply and drove to the Emerald Grove Community Hall. The parking lot was already full, headlights glinting off the wet asphalt as clusters of residents gathered outside, murmuring her name. Inside, the air was thick with tension. At the front table sat the HOA board, Mr. Harrow, Ms. Caldwell, Mr. Peters, and two others. Papers and maps of the lake were spread out before them. Evelyn sat near the back, her heart steady but alert. Mr. Harrow began the meeting with an authoritative tone. "We've had decades of shared dock access," he said. "Now a new property owner wants to restrict that. We need to decide whether the association should take formal action." Murmurs spread through the crowd, some angry, some curious. When he finished, Evelyn stood, holding up the copy of her deed. Her voice was calm but firm. "I'm not taking anything from anyone," she said. "The law states clearly that my property includes exclusive littoral rights, the very shoreline and docks your members have been using. I didn't write those laws, but I intend to follow them." A few residents looked uneasy, others scowled openly. One woman shouted, "That lake belongs to all of us." Evelyn met her gaze. "Then why didn't your HOA buy this parcel when you had the chance?" The room fell quiet. She could feel the weight of decades-old entitlement pressing against her, but she refused to back down. When? Ethan Cole hadn't set foot on his grandfather's land in over a decade. The old truck rattled down the gravel road that used to be lined with pine trees and wildflowers, but now it led to something unrecognizable. Where there had once been open meadows and quiet forests stood rows of modern houses, gleaming white fences, trim lawns, and driveways lined with SUVs. A large wooden sign at the entrance read Silver Meadows Community, managed by the HOA. The sight made his stomach twist. He parked at the edge of what used to be his grandfather's pasture, staring in disbelief. 35 homes stretched across the valley, right up to the tree line near the dam. The dam itself still stood, the old concrete wall dark with moss, holding back the calm waters of Silver Creek Lake. His grandfather had built it by hand in the 1950s, turning the shallow creek into a lake that glistened under the sun. Now, it was the centerpiece of someone else's neighborhood. Ethan approached one of the houses, where a woman in yoga pants watered her flowers. She looked startled when he asked how long the community had been there. "Almost 5 years," she said, frowning slightly. The developer said this was unused land. "You must be new here." New here. The word stung. He was the only one who had ever belonged to this land. He drove to the HOA office, a converted model home with glass doors and a sign that read Brian Huxley, President. Inside, Brian greeted him with the polished smile of a man used to getting his way. When Ethan showed the original deed, yellowed but clear, Brian's smile faded just enough to reveal irritation. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said. "Old survey lines, maybe. But these homes were approved by the county." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You built on private property." "My property." Brian leaned back in his chair. Well, if that's true, I'm sure we can work something out legally. Outside, Ethan stood by the lake, feeling the hum of the dam beneath his boots. The rusted lever still stood in place, locked by an iron key that only he possessed. The same key his grandfather had handed him the day he died. The houses might sit proudly on stolen soil, but every board, every blade of grass depended on the dam staying shut. And Ethan still decided when it opened.